The chilled fog of Boston Harbor clung to Sarah Pembroke's coat as she made her way along the wooden pier. October 1869 had brought an early autumn chill, one that seemed to penetrate deeper than just her skin. As the newly appointed curator of maritime photography at the Massachusetts Historical Society, she had been tasked with cataloging recently donated daguerreotypes from the Civil War-era naval vessels. "Miss Pembroke over here," called Professor Hamilton, his silver beard catching droplets of mist as he waved from the doorway of the Society's waterfront annex. "I've had the Porter collection brought down from storage. Quite remarkable preservation, if I do say so." Sarah nodded politely, though her enthusiasm was genuine. After years as an assistant, this was her first independent project of significance. The Porter collection photographs from the USS Constitution and other vessels represented a rare glimpse into naval life during a transformative period in American history. "You'll have the room to yourself," Hamilton continued, unlocking the study room door. "These images haven't been properly examined since they were donated by Porter's widow last spring." The room smelled of dust and salt. Archival boxes lined the central table, each labeled with meticulous handwriting. Sarah removed her gloves, eager to begin. "I should have a preliminary inventory by week's end." "Excellent. Though I should mention ... double quotes." Hamilton hesitated, his usual academic confidence faltering. "Mrs. Porter had some unusual comments about certain photographs. Superstitious nonsense, I'm sure, but she insisted we be cautious." Sarah smiled politely. "Grief often manifests in peculiar ways, Professor." "Indeed. Well, I'll leave you to it." Alone with the collection, Sarah methodically began her work, photographing and documenting each image before carefully returning it to its archival sleeve. Lieutenant James Porter had been an early photography enthusiast, documenting naval life aboard several vessels. His images captured the daily routines, the camaraderie, the unguarded moments of sailors long since past. 3 hours into her task, Sarah reached a manila envelope marked simply Constitution, July 1869. Inside was a remarkable group photograph of 37 sailors posed on deck. The quality was exceptional for the period, each face clear enough to distinguish individual features. Sarah began the standard documentation, counting figures and noting details, when something caught her attention. In the back row, slightly offset from the others, stood a young sailor with a peculiar grin, while the other men maintained the serious expressions typical of period photography. This man's smile seemed almost modern in its casualness, visible, eyes creased with genuine amusement. Something about his expression sent an unexpected chill through Sarah. She turned the photograph over, noting the careful handwriting, USS Constitution crew, July 18, 1869. All present excepting Quartermaster Miller, deceased. A smaller notation below in different handwriting read, Thomas Holloway, back row, drowned June 23, 1869. Sarah frowned, picking up her magnifying glass to examine the grinning sailor more closely. The notation must be incorrect. The man stood clearly visible in the photograph. She made a note to cross-reference with the ship's logs. As she set the photograph aside, she noticed a smaller image that had been beneath it, a close-up of the same grinning sailor standing alone on deck. The image was darker, less professionally composed than Porter's usual work. On the back, hastily scrawled, "He should not be here. He should not smile." The Massachusetts State Archives occupied a grim granite building near the waterfront, its windows perpetually filmed with salt residue. 2 days after her discovery of the anomalous photograph, Sarah found herself navigating the narrow corridors of its naval records section. The Constitution's logs from 1869? The clerk raised an eyebrow. "That's specific. Research project?" Sarah nodded. "I'm cataloging Lieutenant Porter's photographic collection. There's a discrepancy I'm hoping to resolve." The clerk disappeared into the stacks, returning several minutes later with a leather-bound volume. "June through December 1869. Sign here, please." Sarah claimed a desk by the window, where the weak October light provided just enough illumination. The logbook's pages were filled with the precise handwriting of various officers, documenting everything from weather conditions to disciplinary actions. She turned to June 1869, scanning methodically until she found what she was looking for. June 23, 1869. Fair weather, light westerly winds. At 0430 hours, Ordinary Seaman Thomas Holloway discovered missing from night watch. Search of vessel conducted. Personal effects found in order. At 0700 hours, body recovered from harbor waters near stern. Ship's surgeon confirms death by drowning. No signs of struggle observed. Deceased had expressed no unusual behaviors in days prior. Effects catalogued and stored for return to family. Burial at sea conducted at 1600 hours per naval regulations. Chaplain officiating. Sarah read the entry twice, confirming the date and name. According to official naval records, Thomas Holloway had indeed drowned nearly a month before the photograph was taken. She flipped forward to July 18th, the date of the group photograph. July 18th, 1869. Overcast, calm seas. Vessel docked at Boston Navy Yard for scheduled maintenance. L.T. Porter conducted photographic documentation of crew at 1300 hours. All hands present except those on shore leave McCormick, Jensen, Wallace, and Quartermaster Miller deceased, May 1869. No mention of Holloway, which made sense given his recorded death. But there was also no mention of any disturbance or unusual occurrence during the photography session. If someone had impersonated a dead sailor, surely it would have caused comment. As Sarah prepared to close the logbook, a small notation at the bottom of the July 18th entry caught her attention. Personal note: strange atmosphere among crew today. Several men reported missing personal items. Lult Porter's daguerreotype plates found disturbed this morning. Second officer recommends increased night watches. Capt. W. Harris. Sarah spent another hour cross-referencing other dates but found no further mention of Holloway or explanations for the photographic anomaly. As she returned the logbook to the clerk, her mind kept returning to the grinning sailor and the mysterious note: he should not be here. He should not smile. Outside, the weather had deteriorated. Rain lashed against the cobblestones as Sarah hurried back toward the Historical Society, her research notes tucked securely in her leather satchel. The street lamps cast weak pools of yellow light that barely penetrated the gloom. As she passed a narrow alley, movement caught her eye, a figure leaning against the brick wall, collar turned up against the rain. For an instant, Sarah thought she glimpsed a familiar grin, but when she turned for a better look, the alley was empty. Back at the Society's annex, Sarah found a message waiting from Professor Hamilton. Miss Pembroke Porter's widow has requested a meeting regarding the collection. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at her Beacon Hill residence. Please prepare to discuss progress. Address enclosed. Eleanor Porter's home stood among the elegant brick townhouses of Beacon Hill, its black shutters and ornate door-knocker speaking to old Boston wealth. Sarah arrived precisely at 2, clutching her portfolio of notes and several photographic prints she'd prepared for discussion. A housekeeper showed Sarah to the parlor where Mrs. Porter sat by the window, her black morning dress a stark contrast to the room's burgundy furnishings. Though only in her 50s, grief had carved deep lines around her eyes. Miss Pembroke, she said, not rising, thank you for coming. Professor Hamilton speaks highly of your meticulous work. It's an honor to catalog your husband's collection, Sarah replied. His technical skill was remarkable for the period. Mrs. Porter's expression remained impassive. My husband was devoted to his photography, perhaps too devoted. She gestured to a chair. Please sit. Tea? The pleasantries continued through the first cup of tea, with Mrs. Porter asking polite but distant questions about the cataloging process. As the housekeeper poured a second cup, however, her demeanor shifted. Professor Hamilton mentioned you've been examining the Constitution photographs from James's last commission. Sarah nodded. Yes, they're exceptionally well preserved. The group portrait from July 1869 is particularly... You found it, then? Mrs. Porter's interruption was soft but definitive. The photograph with the smiling sailor. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about her research. Yes, I noticed an inconsistency in the documentation. According to the ship's log, a sailor named Thomas Holloway drowned in June, yet appears in the July photograph. Mrs. Porter set down her teacup with a clatter. I told Hamilton those photographs should have been destroyed. Destroyed? But they're historically significant. My husband was never the same after that final commission. Mrs. Porter continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken. He returned, obsessed with his photographs, locking himself in his darkroom for days. He claimed. She faltered, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. He claimed Holloway appeared in photographs where he had not been present during exposure. Sarah carefully extracted the group portrait from her portfolio. This photograph? Mrs. Porter wouldn't look at it. That and others. James became convinced that Holloway was appearing in more and more images, not just from the Constitution, but personal photographs taken here in Boston. That's impossible, Sarah said gently. Is it, Mrs.? Porter finally met her gaze, eyes sharp with emotion. My husband was a rational man, Miss Pembroke. Naval officer, educated at Harvard. He understood the scientific principles of photography better than most professionals of the day. Yet in his final letter, she stopped abruptly. His final letter? Sarah prompted. Mrs. Porter crossed to a small writing desk, unlocked a drawer, and withdrew an envelope, its paper yellowed with age. James drowned himself in the harbor last April. The official report called it an accident, but I know better. This was delivered to me the morning they found his body. Sarah accepted the letter with historian's hands, careful of the fragile paper. The handwriting was jagged, unlike the precise notations on the photographs. My dearest Eleanor, Holloway follows me now, not just in photographs, but in reflections, in shadows. I see his grin in every darkened window. Last night I woke to find him standing at the foot of our bed, water pooling beneath him on the carpet. When I called out, he vanished, but the water remained. Porter believed his camera could capture moments of truth invisible to the naked eye. He was more correct than he knew. Each image reveals more of Holloway's true nature. Not human, never human. The Constitution's chaplain told me an old sailor's superstition: those who drown at sea sometimes refuse their fate, clinging to the living who witnessed their passing. But Holloway was already something else before the waters took him. The crew knew. They saw how animals recoiled from him, how plants withered in his presence. I can no longer trust what my eyes perceive. But the camera cannot lie. I have one final experiment to conduct. If successful, Holloway will be confined to silver and glass, trapped in the emulsion. If you are reading this, I have failed. Burn the photographs, Eleanor. All of them. With eternal devotion, James. Sarah carefully returned the letter to Mrs. Porter, her academic skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence of a respected naval officer's descent into paranoia. After his death, Mrs. Porter said quietly, I found his darkroom in disarray. Chemical baths overturned, plates shattered, but some photographs remained intact. Those I donated to the society, hoping they might be safely contained in your archives. And the others? Mrs. Porter's gaze drifted to the fireplace. Destroyed, as James wished. As Sarah prepared to leave, Mrs. Porter gripped her arm with surprising strength. Be careful with those photographs, Miss Pembroke. Sometimes looking too closely at something invites its attention. That evening, as rain continued to batter Boston, Sarah sat in her modest apartment, Porter's photographs spread across her dining table. The logical explanation, she reasoned, was that the ship's log contained an error, or perhaps the notation on the photograph was incorrect. People did not appear in photographs taken after their deaths. Yet Lieutenant Porter had been convinced otherwise, convinced enough to take his own life. Sarah's academic training demanded evidence, verification. If Holloway had indeed drowned on June 23rd, there should be additional documentation beyond the ship's log. Naval personnel deaths required paperwork, especially those occurring during active duty. She turned her attention to the photograph of Holloway alone on deck. The quality was poorer than Porter's usual work, slightly blurred, as if the subject had moved during exposure. The sailor's grin seemed wider than in the group portrait, his eyes darker. Water appeared to glisten on his uniform, though the log had noted fair weather that day. Sarah made notes on inconsistencies, possible explanations, questions for further research. Her apartment's old pipes groaned in the walls, the building settling as the temperature dropped outside. Near midnight, exhaustion finally overtook professional curiosity. She carefully returned the photographs to their protective sleeves, leaving only her notes on the table. Sleep came fitfully. Sarah dreamed of water, dark harbor water, rising around her bed, bringing with it the scent of brine and decay. In the dream, she heard a soft splashing from her apartment's small bathroom, like footsteps in shallow puddles. She woke with a start at 3 a.m. The apartment was dark, save for a thin sliver of moonlight through the curtains. The splashing sound continued. Drip, drip, from the bathroom. A leaking pipe, she told herself, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards felt damp beneath her bare feet. Sarah lit the lamp on her bedside table, its warm glow pushing back the darkness. Water had indeed seeped under the bathroom door, forming a small pool on the wooden floor. Cursing the building's ancient plumbing, she approached the bathroom, lamp held high. The door creaked open to reveal an empty room. The sink's faucet dripped steadily, though she was certain she'd turned it off before bed. More concerning was the state of the small mirror above the sink. It was completely fogged, as if someone had recently taken a hot bath. Sarah wiped the mirror with a towel, revealing her own tired reflection. For an instant she thought she saw another face behind her, grinning, water streaming from dark hair, but when she spun around, the bathroom remained empty. Sleep proved impossible after that. Sarah spent the remaining hours before dawn reviewing her notes, adding a new section titled, Possible Medical Explanations for Porter's Delusions. Carbon monoxide poisoning from the chemical processes of early photography was a documented hazard. Perhaps Porter's paranoia stemmed from prolonged exposure to darkroom chemicals. Yet this explanation did nothing to account for the physical evidence. A man appearing clearly in a photograph taken after naval records confirmed his death. As the first gray light of morning filtered through her windows, Sarah made a decision. She would visit the Constitution, now permanently docked at Boston Navy Yard as a museum ship. Perhaps something about the vessel itself might offer clues. The USS Constitution stood as a proud relic of America's naval history. Its wooden hull and complex rigging maintained by a dedicated crew of modern sailors. In the weak October sunlight, it looked smaller than Sarah had imagined from Porter's photographs. A young naval officer conducted tours for the handful of visitors braving the gloomy weather. Sarah lingered at the back of the group, comparing the physical spaces with the settings in Porter's images. When the tour concluded at the main deck, she approached the officer. "Excuse me, Lieutenant. I'm researching a sailor who served aboard the Constitution in 1869, Thomas Holloway. Would records from that period still be accessible?" The officer looked surprised. "That's an unusually specific request, ma'am. Most visitors ask about the War of 1812. I'm with the Massachusetts Historical Society," Sarah explained. "We're cataloging photographs from that period. Well, the ship's original logs are archived, but we maintain a registry of all known crew members in the museum office. Could check for you." The museum office was a modern addition to the dock area, its walls decorated with historical photographs and maps. The lieutenant consulted a massive leather-bound volume, running his finger down columns of faded names. Holloway, Thomas. Yes, here he is. Ordinary seaman, assigned to the Constitution in March 1869. The lieutenant frowned. Deceased, June 1869. Cause, drowning. Does it mention anything unusual about his service? Or his death? The officer scanned the entry. No specific details, but there's a reference to another document. Looks like a special inquiry was conducted. That's unusual for a simple drowning. He closed the book. Those records would be in the Naval Historical Center in Washington. I could request copies, but it would take weeks. Sarah thanked him and was preparing to leave when she noticed a wall of photographs, historical images of the Constitution through the decades. Her eye was drawn immediately to an enlarged print of the same group portrait she had been studying. "That's the 1869 crew," the lieutenant confirmed, following her gaze. "One of the earliest photographic records of the ship's company." Sarah approached the photograph, scanning the back row. The grinning sailor was absent. "This is a reproduction?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, ma'am. Original print, donated by the Porter family in the 1870s. Sarah leaned closer, counting faces. 36 sailors, not 37. The space where Holloway had stood in her version of the photograph was simply empty. "Are there other photographs from this period on display?" The lieutenant led her to a small exhibition about naval photography. Several of Porter's images were featured, including individual portraits of officers. A glass case contained Porter's actual camera, a bulky wooden box with brass fittings and a large lens. Lieutenant Porter was something of a pioneer in naval photography, the officer explained. He believed photographs could capture aspects of reality invisible to the naked eye. "There's actually an interesting story about Thomas Holloway," Sarah interrupted. The lieutenant looked startled. "How did you know?" "It's not mentioned in any of our official materials, but it's something of a ghost story among the Constitution's caretakers. I'd like to hear it." He glanced around, ensuring no other visitors were within earshot. According to the story, Holloway wasn't just any sailor. He joined the crew in New Orleans after the previous quartermaster's death. From the beginning, other sailors reported strange occurrences, personal items going missing, unexplained noises at night. Animals brought aboard for food would panic in his presence. "And he drowned?" Sarah prompted. "Supposedly while standing watch alone. No one saw him fall overboard, but his body was recovered the next morning. After his burial at sea, sailors claimed to see him aboard the ship, just glimpses in dark corridors or reflections in windows." Porter became obsessed with photographing these sightings. The lieutenant shrugged apologetically. "Just an old sea story, ma'am. Sailors are a superstitious lot." As Sarah departed the Navy Yard, she felt increasingly uneasy. The discrepancy between the photographs couldn't be explained by simple error. Either the Historical Society's version or the Navy's version had been altered, but why and by whom? More troubling was the growing sense that she was being watched. Twice on her walk home, Sarah turned suddenly, certain she'd glimpsed a familiar figure following several yards behind. Each time she saw only ordinary Bostonians going about their business. That night she dreamed again of rising water and woke to find her research notes soaked through, the ink running in blue rivulets across the paper. The water smelled of salt. The following day brought steady rain and increasing dread. Sarah sent a telegram to the Naval Historical Center in Washington, requesting urgent information about any special inquiry regarding Thomas Holloway. While waiting for a response that might take days, she returned to the Historical Society to continue her work. Professor Hamilton greeted her with concern. "You look unwell, Miss Pembroke. Perhaps you should take a day's rest." "I'm quite all right," Sarah insisted, though she had barely slept. "Professor, did you personally examine the Porter collection when it was donated?" Hamilton considered this. "I supervised the accession, certainly. Though I didn't study each photograph in detail, that's why we hired you. The group portrait from July 1869, did you happen to notice anything unusual about it?" "Unusual? No, nothing specific comes to mind." Though Mrs. Porter was particularly agitated about that series, he studied Sarah's face. "You've found something troubling in the collection." Sarah hesitated, uncertain how much of her increasingly bizarre research to share with her employer. "There's a discrepancy between naval records and photographic evidence that I'm trying to resolve." Hamilton nodded thoughtfully. "Historical work often involves such inconsistencies. Documents contradict one another, memories prove unreliable. We piece together truth from fragmentary evidence, and when the evidence defies logical explanation, then we must expand our understanding of what is logical." Hamilton smiled kindly. "You're a methodical researcher, Miss Pembroke. I have every confidence you'll resolve the matter." Alone in the study room, Sarah returned to the Porter collection, this time examining photographs taken before Holloway's recorded death. She found him in 3 images from April and May 1869, always at the edges of group shots, never centrally featured. In each successive photograph, he appeared closer to the camera, his expression progressing from neutral to the unsettling grin of the July image. Sarah made detailed notes, reconstructing a timeline of Holloway's appearance in the photographic record. As she worked, she became aware of a strange odor permeating the room, the unmistakable scent of seawater and something else beneath it, something organic and decaying. She glanced up to find water seeping under the study room door, forming a widening puddle on the wooden floor. Sarah approached cautiously, noting that the liquid appeared darker than ordinary water, with an oily sheen catching the lamplight. When she opened the door, the corridor beyond was dry. The seeping water had no apparent source, yet continued to spread across the study room floor, now reaching the legs of her chair. Sarah's heart raced as she gathered her notes in the photographs, placing them on a higher shelf. The water had nearly reached her ankles when Professor Hamilton appeared in the doorway. "Miss Pembroke, is everything all right? I thought I heard." He stopped, staring at the floor. Good heavens, a pipe must have burst. "I'll call for maintenance immediately." Sarah looked down. The floor was completely dry. Double quotes, she began, then faltered. "Yes, thank you, Professor. I believe I'll conclude my work for today." Outside, the rain had intensified. Sarah hurried through Boston's winding streets, her mind racing between rational explanations and mounting fear. She was experiencing the same delusions that had afflicted Lieutenant Porter, but were they truly delusions? Or was something impossible actually occurring? At her apartment, a telegram waited. "Naval Historical Center respond. Stop Holloway inquiry records. Sealed by federal order. 1870 stop require additional authorization. Stop sealed by federal order." What about a sailor's drowning would warrant such secrecy? As evening fell, Sarah lit every lamp in her small apartment, pushing back the shadows that seemed to gather in corners. She reviewed her notes, searching for patterns, connections, anything that might explain the inexplicable. A knock at her door startled her. Through the peephole, she saw the young naval lieutenant from the Constitution. "Miss Pembroke, Lieutenant Adams from the museum. May I speak with you? It's about Holloway." Sarah hesitated, then unlatched the door. Lieutenant Adams stood in the hallway, his uniform damp from the rain. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said. "After you left, I continued searching our archives. I found something you should see." He withdrew a small leather journal from his coat. This belonged to the Constitution's chaplain in 1869. It mentions Holloway several times. Sarah invited him in, clearing space at her table. The journal's pages were brittle with age, the handwriting cramped but legible. "The chaplain believed Holloway was ... double," quotes Lieutenant Adams paused, seemingly embarrassed. "Well, he believed Holloway wasn't human. Listen to this entry from May 1869. Holloway attended Sunday service again today, though he stands apart from the men and never joins in prayer. I have observed that water in his vicinity becomes agitated, small ripples in drinking cups, condensation forming on surfaces. The man exudes dampness, as if perpetually emerging from the sea." Sarah felt a chill despite the apartment's warmth. What happened during the special inquiry after his death? The journal doesn't say explicitly. But there's this. Dated July 20th, 1869. L.T. Porter's photographs confirm what I have long suspected. The entity calling itself Holloway persists beyond physical death. its image appearing in the silver emulsion like a stain spreading through cloth. Capped. Harris has ordered all discussion of the matter forbidden. The official record will state only that an ordinary seaman drowned while on watch. God forgive our silence. A crash of thunder punctuated the chaplain's ominous words. The storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows with renewed fury. "I should go," Lieutenant Adams said, closing the journal. "The last ferry to the Navy Yard leaves soon." "Take this," Sarah said, handing him her card. "If you find anything else—" The lights flickered and died, plunging the apartment into darkness. Outside, the storm had knocked out power to the entire block. In the sudden darkness, Sarah heard Lieutenant Adams fumbling for the door. "Just a moment," she called. "I have matches in the drawer." As she moved carefully across the room, her feet splashed through unexpected water, ankle-deep and rapidly rising. The smell of brine filled the apartment. "Lieutenant Adams," she called, her voice tight with fear. No response came. Sarah struck a match, its small flame illuminating a horrifying scene. Water poured from every surface of her apartment walls, ceiling, furniture, as if the entire room were underwater. Lieutenant Adams was gone, the front door closed and inexplicably dry despite the flood surrounding it. The match sputtered out. Sarah struck another, using it to light a candle. In its wavering light, she saw something moving in the water, a dark shape circling her like a shark. The water continued to rise, now halfway up her calves, soaking her dress. With desperate clarity, Sarah understood what was happening. Through her research, her attention, she had somehow summoned the thing that had driven Lieutenant Porter to suicide. The thing that had once been Thomas Holloway, if it had ever been human at all. The candle revealed Porter's photograph still laid out on her table, somehow remaining dry despite the rising water. The July group portrait now showed 35 sailors, not 36 or 37. Holloway's grin had disappeared from the image, because he was here, in her apartment. A splashing sound behind her deliberate footsteps moving through water. Sarah spun around, raising the candle. A figure stood in the corner, a man in a naval uniform from decades past. Water streaming continuously from his clothes and hair. His face was partly obscured by shadow, but his grin was visible, wide, unnatural, revealing teeth too numerous and sharp to be human. "What do you want?" Sarah whispered. The figure took a step closer. The water rippled around him but made no sound under his feet. Recognition, came the reply, in a voice like bubbles rising through liquid. "Witnesses. Someone to see what I truly am, and what are you?" The grin widened impossibly. "Something older than your ships. Something that drinks the souls of drowning sailors and wears their faces." Another step closer. Porter recognized me. He tried to trap me in his silver and glass, but I'm not so easily confined. Sarah's mind raced. Porter had believed photographs could capture aspects of reality invisible to the naked eye. He had also believed his camera could somehow contain this entity. The candle flickered as water reached her knees. Soon it would extinguish her only light. "You appeared in Porter's photographs," Sarah said, edging toward the table where the images lay. "Why?" His camera saw true. Most humans look but do not see. They have forgotten how to perceive the waters that flow beneath reality. Another step. "But you, Sarah Pembroke, you looked too closely. You called to me with your attention just as Porter did." The thing that was not Holloway lunged suddenly, water exploding around it. Sarah scrambled backward, knocking over her chair. The creature's hands were webbed, fingers elongating into claws as it reached for her. Sarah grabbed the July photograph from the table and thrust it toward the creature like a ward. "You're trapped in here," she said, desperation fueling her words. "This is your true prison." The creature hesitated, its grin faltering for the first time. It stared at the photograph with something like fear. "Porter was right," Sarah continued, her voice steadying. "The camera captures truth. It binds you to the moment of exposure. An idea formed, not from scientific training, but from the half-remembered folklore of her childhood. Names had power. Images had power. Thomas Holloway," she declared, "I name you in your prison of silver and light." The creature shrieked, a sound like metal scraping against stone. It lunged again, but seemed unable to touch the photograph Sarah held before her. "Return to your image," she commanded, unsure if her words held any true power but committed to the desperate logic of the moment. "Return to silver and glass." Water swirled violently around the room, forming a whirlpool with the creature at its center. It thrashed and writhed, its human appearance melting away to reveal something ancient and ichthytic, all teeth and scales and lidless eyes. Sarah maintained her grip on the photograph, repeating her improvised exorcism as water climbed her waist. The creature's form began to blur, becoming translucent, its substance seeming to flow toward the photograph in her hands. With a final otherworldly howl, the entity collapsed into the whirlpool. Water rushed toward the photograph as if drawn by tremendous force, soaking the image in Sarah's hands. Then silence. The flood receded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Sarah standing in her dry apartment holding a damp photograph. Outside, the storm continued, but within her walls all was still. With trembling hands, Sarah turned the photograph toward the candlelight. In the back row, Thomas Holloway stood once more, his grin fixed forever in silver emulsion, water streaming eternally from his uniform. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat vigil with the photograph, watching Holloway's image for any sign of change. By morning's light, she had formulated a theory incomplete and perhaps irrational, but the only explanation that encompassed all she had witnessed. Some ancient entity, something that preyed upon drowning sailors, had assumed the identity of Thomas Holloway. It had infiltrated the Constitution's crew, revealing its true nature only to Porter, whose photographic experiments had somehow both detected and aggravated it. The photographs didn't just record the entity's presence. They actually contained pieces of its essence, trapped in the chemical emulsion. Porter had understood this, attempting a final experiment to permanently bind the creature to photographic plates. He had failed, driven to suicide, but had left behind the means for others to continue his work. With the first light of dawn, Sarah returned to the Historical Society. Professor Hamilton was surprised to see her so early, and more surprised at her request. "Lieutenant Porter's camera?" "Yes, we have it in storage, though it's quite delicate." "May I ask why?" "I believe it's central to resolving the discrepancies I've discovered," Sarah replied, maintaining professional composure despite her exhaustion. Hamilton studied her with concern. "You look unwell, Miss Pembroke. Perhaps this project has become too consuming." "I assure you, Professor, I'm quite all right. I simply need to examine the camera's technical specifications." The camera, when retrieved from storage, was an impressive piece of engineering, larger and more complex than most portrait cameras of the period. Its brass lens housing was inscribed with unusual markings that didn't match any photographic manufacturer Sarah recognized. Porter modified it extensively, Hamilton explained. His widow mentioned he had consulted with specialists in optical physics at Harvard. Something about capturing wavelengths beyond normal perception, whatever that means. Sarah carefully opened the camera's rear compartment where photographic plates would be inserted. The interior was lined with thin sheets of silver, creating a reflective chamber unlike any camera she had studied before. "Do we have any of his unexposed plates?" she asked. Hamilton frowned. "I believe so, though they'd be useless now. Photographic emulsion doesn't last decades without deterioration. Nevertheless, I'd like to see them." The unexposed plates stored in a light, tight box appeared unusual even to Sarah's untrained eye. The glass was thicker than standard photographic plates, and the emulsion had a peculiar bluish tint when examined under the room's gaslights. Porter's notes mentioned he created his own emulsion formula, Hamilton said. Something about increased sensitivity to ultraviolet light, or sensitivity to something else entirely, Sarah thought. She spent the day examining Porter's technical journals, which revealed a man gradually transitioning from conventional photography to increasingly esoteric experiments. His final entries described a process for binding ethereal emanations to silver nitrate through electromagnetic resonance, meaningless terms to Sarah, but suggestive of Porter's evolving understanding of whatever he was pursuing. As dusk approached, Sarah made her decision. She would recreate Porter's experiment under controlled conditions, using his camera and remaining plates to attempt what he had failed to complete, the permanent containment of the entity in photographic form. "Professor Hamilton, I'd like to borrow the camera and one plate for an experiment of my own." Hamilton hesitated. "These are valuable historical artifacts, Miss Pembroke. I understand. But I believe this experiment is essential to understanding Porter's work." She maintained a calm, scholarly demeanor despite the wild improbability of her true intentions. "I'll return everything tomorrow, undamaged." Perhaps it was her previously impeccable professional reputation. Or perhaps Hamilton sensed the urgency behind her request. Whatever the reason, he reluctantly agreed. That evening, Sarah prepared her apartment according to Porter's final journal entries. She arranged 7 mirrors in a precise configuration, creating a chamber of reflected light. The camera sat at the center, loaded with a single plate, on a small table within the camera's field of view. She placed the photograph of Holloway, the one in which he stood alone on deck, grinning at the camera. According to Porter's notes, reflections could amplify the binding effect, creating a recursive trap from which the entity could not escape. Sarah drew the curtains, lit 7 candles at specific points around the room, and waited. Outside, another storm gathered, wind rattling her windows as if seeking entry. The barometer on her wall dropped steadily, signaling atmospheric pressure changes consistent with Porter's described ideal conditions. At precisely midnight, Sarah uncapped the camera's lens, beginning the exposure. Porter's notes had specified an exposure time of 33 minutes, an unusually precise duration that suggested ritual rather than photographic science. As the minutes passed, the apartment grew unnaturally cold. Sarah's breath clouded before her face, though it was only October. The candle flames burned blue, then green, casting sickly light across the room's surfaces. 20 minutes into the exposure, water began to seep from beneath her door, not the rushing flood of her previous encounter, but a slow, deliberate ingress. The liquid moved with purpose, forming rivulets that converged toward the photograph on the table. Sarah remained motionless, unwilling to disrupt the exposure. Porter's final entry had warned that the process, once begun, must be completed without interruption. At 28 minutes, the photograph began to change. The paper curled at the edges, not from the encroaching water, but from some internal transformation. Holloway's image blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again, as if struggling against confinement. A sound filled the room, not quite a voice, not quite the crash of waves, but something between. It rose in pitch and volume as the 30th minute approached. "You cannot bind me," the sound seemed to say, though Sarah heard the words in her mind rather than with her ears. "I am ancient. I have worn 1,000 faces." Water climbed the table legs, reaching for the photograph. Sarah clutched the edge of her chair, forcing herself to remain still, despite every instinct screaming for flight. "I will take your face next," the voice promised. "Your eyes will see ocean depths. Your lungs will fill with brine." At 32 minutes, the apartment door burst open. Lieutenant Adams stood in the doorway, soaking wet despite the rain having not yet begun outside. "Miss Pembroke," he called, "I've found something you must see immediately." Sarah recognized the grin spreading across his face, too wide, too knowing. "Not Adams at all." "You're too late," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "One more minute." The thing wearing Adams's face lunged forward but stopped at the edge of the mirror configuration, as if encountering an invisible barrier. It snarled, Adams's features melting into something inhuman. Porter tried this. It hissed. He failed. He didn't understand what he was facing, Sarah countered, watching the seconds tick by on her pocket watch. "You need witnesses, those who see you, acknowledge you. That's how you persist." The creature thrashed against the unseen barrier, water churning around its feet. "I am older than your species. I cannot be contained by your primitive magic." "Not magic," Sarah corrected as the final seconds approached. "Science. Light and silver and chemical reaction. A prison made of human perception." As her watch marked the 33rd minute, Sarah capped the camera lens. A howl of rage filled the room, emanating from both the false Adams at the doorway and the photograph on the table. The water rose violently, splashing across the mirrors, extinguishing candles. The thing that was not Adams dissolved before her eyes, its substance flowing like quicksilver toward the camera. The photograph on the table burst into blue flame, consumed in seconds without leaving ash or ember. Then silence. The water receded. The apartment door stood closed with no sign of forced entry. Only the unexplained dampness of the floor remained as evidence of what had occurred. With trembling hands, Sarah removed the exposed plate from the camera. In the dim light, she could see that the emulsion had changed color from blue-tinged silver to a deep, opalescent black that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the candlelight. She wrapped the plate carefully in black cloth, following Porter's instructions to the letter. By dawn, she had prepared the final component of his process, a sealed lead box lined with silver and inscribed with what appeared to be astronomical symbols. "A prison," Porter had written, "for that which exists between states of matter." The Massachusetts Historical Society opened at 9. Sarah arrived at 8:30, the lead box carefully packed in her satchel along with Porter's camera. Professor Hamilton met her at the door, his expression troubled. "Miss Pembroke, there's been an incident." Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. "What sort of incident?" "A break-in, it appears. The Porter collection, someone's been through it. Photographs disturbed, some missing." He led her to the study room. The archival boxes had been ransacked, their contents scattered across the floor. Several daguerreotypes lay shattered, their glass plates deliberately broken. "This happened overnight?" Sarah asked, surveying the damage. Hamilton nodded. The night watchman heard nothing. No signs of forced entry on exterior doors. Sarah knelt to examine the broken photographs. Each was from the Constitution series, and each had featured Thomas Holloway in some capacity. "The naval officer," she murmured. "I beg your pardon?" "Lieutenant Adams from the Constitution Museum." Did he contact you yesterday? Ask about me or the collection? Hamilton looked puzzled. No one from the Navy Yard has been in touch. Why do you ask? Sarah carefully set her satchel on the table away from the scattered materials. Professor, I need to secure one item immediately. After that, I'll explain everything. She removed the lead box, checking that its seals remained intact. According to Porter's notes, the box required special storage away from water in a dry environment with stable temperature. The Society has a climate-controlled vault, doesn't it? For particularly valuable documents? Yes, but Hamilton began. This needs to be placed there immediately. It's the culmination of Porter's work and potentially dangerous if mishandled. Something in her tone must have conveyed the urgency, for Hamilton didn't question further. He led her to the Society's basement, where a modern vault had been installed to preserve the most delicate historical materials. Once the box was secured, Sarah related an edited version of her discoveries, the discrepancies in the Holloway photographs, Porter's experimental camera techniques, the apparent obsession that had led to his suicide. She omitted the supernatural elements, framing the matter as a historical mystery rather than an encounter with something beyond human understanding. Fascinating, Hamilton said when she concluded. Porter sounds like a man ahead of his time, perhaps experimenting with spectroscopic photography decades before it became scientifically understood. Perhaps, Sarah agreed, relieved he hadn't dismissed her entirely. The plate in that box represents his final experiment. I believe it should remain sealed, as his notes specifically warn against exposing it to light or moisture. Hamilton nodded thoughtfully. We'll catalog it appropriately. Though I admit I'm curious about what image it might contain. Some questions are better left unanswered. Professor, Sarah replied, thinking of Porter's final letter to his wife. Some knowledge carries too high a price. As she left the Society that afternoon, Sarah felt a curious mixture of accomplishment and unease. Had she truly trapped something ancient and malevolent in silver emulsion and lead? Or had she succumbed to the same delusion that claimed Porter, seeing patterns and intentions where only coincidence existed? The rational historian in her suspected the latter, yet she could not dismiss what she had witnessed with her own eyes, water materializing from nowhere, a naval officer transforming into something inhuman, photographs that changed when no human hand touched them. Walking along the harbor, Sarah gazed out at the gray Atlantic. What other entities might lurk in its depths, wearing the faces of the drowned? How many sailors' disappearances throughout history might be attributed not to the ocean's natural dangers, but to predators of a more deliberate nature? She shivered, pulling her coat tighter. The late October wind carried the scent of impending winter, and beneath it, just barely perceptible, the faint odor of brine. That evening, Sarah wrote a comprehensive account of her experiences, sealing it with instructions that it should be opened only in the event of her death or disappearance. This document she entrusted to her sister in New York, with a letter explaining it as research notes for a possible scholarly article. It would be her only insurance against the possibility that her actions had been insufficient, that the entity might somehow escape its photographic prison and seek revenge against the woman who had confined it. 1 year later, October 1870 arrived with early snow, unusual for Boston. Sarah stood at her office window in the Historical Society, watching white flakes accumulate on cobblestones still visible beneath the thin layer of powder. Her promotion to senior archivist had come with a private office, small but comfortable, with a view of the harbor. The Porter collection had been fully cataloged, its mysteries documented in an article published in the Journal of American Maritime History. Sarah's paper on photographic anomalies in naval documentation, the USS Constitution, 1869, had generated modest interest in academic circles, primarily as a study in early photographic techniques rather than supernatural phenomena. Professor Hamilton had reluctantly agreed to maintain the sealed lead box in the Society's vault, though he occasionally questioned the necessity of such precautions for what he believed to be simply an unusual photographic plate. Sarah had not experienced any further inexplicable events. No water appeared from nowhere. No sailors grinned at her from shadows. Her dreams remained undisturbed by visions of dark water or drowning men. Life had returned to normal, or as normal as it could be for someone who had glimpsed what lurked beneath the surface of reality. A knock at her office door interrupted her thoughts. The Society's secretary entered with a telegram. "Just arrived for you, Miss Pembroke." From Washington, Sarah thanked her, breaking the seal with a paper knife. The message was brief. Naval Historical Center to Sarah Pembroke, stop records requested now available. Per Freedom of Information Act, stop special inquiry Holloway case accessible if still interested, stop unusual circumstances warrant discussion, stop LT Commander Wilson presiding. Stop. Sarah read the message twice. After a year with no further information, why would the Navy suddenly offer access to previously sealed records? She drafted a response accepting the offer and requesting the materials be sent to Boston, unwilling to travel to Washington during winter conditions. 3 weeks later, a sealed naval dispatch arrived containing copies of the official inquiry into Thomas Holloway's death. The documents, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved, told a story far stranger than even Sarah had pieced together. Thomas Holloway, according to ship's records, had never existed before his appearance in New Orleans in March 1869. No birth records, no previous naval service, no family connections. He had simply appeared on the docks offering his services as an experienced seaman. The officer who recruited him noted his unusual knowledge of navigation and sea conditions and eyes that seemed to reflect light differently than normal. The inquiry had been initiated not because of his drowning, but because of events preceding it. 3 sailors had disappeared during night watches in the months before Holloway's death, their bodies never recovered, their disappearances never witnessed. Each had been assigned to watch with Holloway, who reported finding their posts empty. Most disturbing was the testimony of the Constitution's surgeon, who had examined Holloway's body after recovery from the harbor. The deceased exhibited no signs of conventional drowning. Lungs contained no water, no evidence of aspirations. Skin showed no expected pallor or bloating despite estimated 12 hours in water. Body temperature measured at 48 degrees Fahrenheit, significantly below ambient water temperature of 62 degrees. Most notably, post-mortem examination revealed gill-like structures beneath skin layer of neck, visible only when tissue was surgically manipulated. These structures were not human in origin or design. The inquiry had concluded with a recommendation that all records be sealed to prevent public alarm and protect naval reputation. Holloway's body had been cremated rather than buried at sea. Contrary to naval tradition, a detail omitted from the official log. A handwritten note accompanied the documents, signed by Lieutenant Commander Wilson. Miss Pembroke, your interest in the Holloway case has not gone unnoticed. Similar incidents have occurred throughout naval history, sailors with no past, unusual physiological characteristics, and connections to unexplained disappearances. The daguerreotype plate you secured at the Historical Society remains the only successful containment of such an entity. We would be interested in discussing your methods as well as Porter's research. With appropriate discretion, LTCMD R.J. Wilson, Office of Naval Intelligence. Sarah set the letter down, her hands trembling slightly. She had not mentioned the photographic plate or Porter's containment theories in any of her official correspondence or published work. How did Wilson know of its existence? Outside her window, snow continued to fall, transforming Boston into a white landscape. The harbor waters had begun to freeze at the edges, forming delicate patterns of ice that would thicken as winter progressed. Sarah thought of the lead box in the Society's vault with its sealed plate and trapped entity. She thought of other sailors throughout history who had drowned under unusual circumstances, of ships lost with all hands in calm waters, of faces glimpsed beneath the waves by survivors of maritime disasters. She penned a careful response to Lieutenant Commander Wilson, agreeing to meet in the spring when travel conditions improved. Until then, she would continue her research, now with the resources of the Navy potentially at her disposal. As she sealed the envelope, Sarah glanced again at the harbor. For an instant, she thought she saw a face in the window's reflection, grinning, water streaming from dark hair. But when she turned, only her own reflection stared back. The sea kept its secrets. But now Sarah Pembroke was watching.